They called her the dirt-born anomaly. When Isolde stepped into the grand courtyard, the noble wolves howled in derision, mocking the trembling human. But their cruel laughter choked into dead silence when the Alpha King's ancestral beast, a creature that had slaughtered warriors, dropped to its knees and bared its neck to her. The kingdom of Valerius was not a place for the weak, and it certainly was not a place for a human. Carved into the jagged cliffs of the northern fjords, the ancestral fortress of House Vane stood as a brutal monument to werewolf supremacy. Here, strength was currency, bloodlines dictated destiny, and humans were nothing more than fragile creatures relegated to the lowest rungs of servitude. Among these servants was Isolde. Isolde was 20 years old, possessing a quiet, unassuming beauty that she deliberately hid beneath soot and coarse linen. Her hands, rough from years of scrubbing the frozen stone floors of the keep, carried the scent of lye and crushed pine. She was an orphan, the daughter of a human apothecary who had succumbed to the winter fever a decade prior. Since then, Isolde had survived by remaining invisible, keeping her head bowed whenever the towering, golden-eyed apex predators of the pack strode past. The pack was currently in a state of volatile anticipation. King Leander, the Alpha of House Vane, had reigned for 5 bloody years without a queen. Leander was a terrifying figure, a man of ruthless efficiency and brooding silence. His face bore a single, jagged scar across his jawline, a testament to the rebellion he had crushed to secure his crown. But a king without a mate was a vulnerability, and the Council of Elders had finally forced his hand. It was time for the rite of the Silver Moon. The rite was no ordinary courtship. In Valerius, the Alpha King did not simply choose a bride. The future queen had to be approved by the Ashen Guardian. The Guardian, known to the pack as Boreas, was a sacred, ancient, dire wolf. Legend held that Boreas carried the spirit of the first Alpha. He was kept deep within the catacombs of the keep, a massive, feral beast that tolerated only Leander. Any she-wolf who wished to sit beside Leander on the throne had to approach Boreas. If the wolf accepted her scent, she would be queen. If not, the rejection was often violent, leaving the suitor maimed or dead. In the weeks leading up to the rite, the castle swelled with visiting nobility. Among them was Lady Vivian of the Western Steppes, a she-wolf of pure pedigree and unparalleled arrogance. Vivian made it her personal mission to ensure Isolde's life was a living hell. "Filthy human," Vivian sneered one afternoon, deliberately knocking over a pail of freezing water Isolde had just hauled from the well. The icy liquid spilled across the flagstones, soaking Isolde's boots. "Clean it up, and ensure the courtyard is spotless. The king's beast will be paraded here tomorrow, and it shouldn't have to smell your wretched kind." Isolde bit her tongue, nodding silently as she dropped to her knees to scrub the stones. She knew better than to talk back to a wolf. A single strike from Vivian could snap her neck, but Isolde harbored a secret that no one in the sprawling, vicious keep knew. 3 nights prior, during a savage blizzard, Isolde had sneaked out to the Whispering Woods to gather winter-blooming chamomile for the cook's ailments. Deep in the thicket, she had stumbled upon a terrifying sight, a massive wolf, larger than any horse, pinned by a crude, silver-laced poacher's trap. The beast was monstrous, its fur the color of storm clouds, its eyes burning like molten gold. It was snapping wildly, driven mad by the agony of the silver burning its flesh. Any sane human would have run. A werewolf in its shifted form, especially a feral one, was a death sentence. But Isolde had watched her father heal the broken and the bleeding. She saw the sheer desperation in the creature's eyes. Moving with agonizing slowness, Isolde had approached the beast. She spoke in low, melodic tones, singing an old human lullaby her mother used to hum. Against all odds, the monster had stopped thrashing. It watched her, a low rumble vibrating in its chest as she knelt in the snow. Braving the snapping jaws, Isolde had used her iron pry bar to snap the trap's mechanism. She had torn her own cloak to bandage its bleeding leg, applying a poultice of chewed chamomile and snow to soothe the silver burn. For 3 hours, she sat with the beast in the freezing dark, stroking its massive head until the shivering stopped. When dawn broke, the wolf had risen, pressed its massive, wet nose against her cheek, and vanished into the snow. Isolde had kept the encounter to herself, assuming she had simply helped a rogue wolf. She had no idea that the ancient chains in the royal catacombs had been found broken that night, nor did she know that the fearsome Ashen Guardian had escaped for a few brief, bloody hours before returning to his den. The night of the rite of the silver moon draped the fortress in an eerie, luminous glow. Torches lined the grand courtyard, casting flickering shadows against the obsidian walls. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meats, spiced wine, and the overwhelming musk of hundreds of anxious werewolves. Isolde stood in the shadows near the servants' entrance, shivering in her thin dress. She clutched a heavy silver basin of water and a stack of linens, ordered to stand by in case the courtyard needed to be washed of blood. On the high balcony overlooking the courtyard sat King Leander. He wore a heavy mantle of black fur, his posture rigid, his expression an unreadable mask of boredom and latent aggression. Beside him stood the elders, their faces taut with anticipation. The heavy iron gates of the catacombs ground open with a deafening screech. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as the handlers emerged. 6 massive warriors, sweating and straining, hauled on thick iron chains. At the center of the chains was Boreas, Isolde's breath caught in her throat. The beast was magnificent, terrifying and utterly lethal. His ash-gray fur bristled, and his golden eyes swept the crowd with predatory disdain. He snapped at one of the handlers, his massive jaws missing the man's arm by a fraction of an inch. But as Isolde stared at the monstrous creature, her heart skipped a beat. She recognized the slight limp in his left hind leg. She recognized the sheer size of him. It was the wolf from the woods. "Let the presentations begin," King Leander's voice boomed, echoing off the stone walls. It carried an authoritative resonance that made even the bravest warriors lower their heads. One by one, the noble she-wolves descended into the courtyard. They presented their necks, radiating dominance and allure, attempting to win the favor of the ancestral beast. First was Lady Seraphina of the Eastern Vale. As she approached, Boreas let out a thunderous snarl, slamming his massive paws into the stone. Seraphina shrieked and scrambled backward, humiliated. Next came Lord Cedric's eldest daughter. She barely made it within 10 feet before the Ashen Guardian lunged, the chains pulling taut with a violent crack. The message was clear: unworthy. King Leander's frown deepened. The pack was growing restless. Murmurs of a cursed reign began to ripple through the lower ranks. Finally, Lady Vivian stepped forward. She wore a gown of crimson silk, her chin tilted in supreme arrogance. She was the strongest she-wolf in the kingdom. Surely the beast would recognize her superiority. Vivian strode toward Boreas, exuding an overwhelming aura of alpha command. "Submit, beast," Vivian whispered, locking eyes with the giant wolf. Boreas went entirely still. For a moment, the courtyard held its breath. Then, with an explosive roar that shook the very foundations of the keep, the wolf tore forward. He didn't just reject her. He attacked. The handlers screamed as they were dragged across the cobblestones. Vivian gasped, losing her footing and falling unceremoniously into the mud as the wolf's jaws snapped inches from her face, held back only by the absolute limit of the iron chains. Laughter erupted from the rival noble houses. Vivian's face flushed purple with rage and embarrassment. She scrambled up, her beautiful dress ruined. Desperate to deflect her humiliation, her eyes darted around the courtyard and landed on the shadows where Isolde stood. "You!" Vivian shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the human servant. "Fetch me water to wash this filth from my hands. Now!" Isolde froze. Stepping into the courtyard meant walking past the enraged beast. But refusing a noble's direct order meant a whipping, or worse. Trembling, Isolde gripped the heavy silver basin and stepped out of the shadows. The courtyard fell completely silent. The sight of a frail, soot-stained human girl walking among the apex predators was pathetic to them. As Isolde hurried forward, keeping her eyes glued to the cobblestones, Vivian sneered. As Isolde passed, Vivian subtly shot out her foot. Isolde tripped. The heavy silver basin crashed to the stone floor with a deafening clang. Water splashed everywhere, and Isolde tumbled hard, scraping her knees and palms against the icy ground. A cruel, vicious laughter erupted from the crowd. The noble werewolves howled, pointing at the fragile human sprawling in the dirt. "Look at the dirt-born anomaly," someone jeered. "A fitting place for a human, in the mud," another shouted. Isolde felt hot tears of shame prick her eyes. She scrambled to gather the fallen linens, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She just wanted to disappear. She wanted the earth to swallow her whole, but the laughter suddenly died. It didn't fade out. It was cut off instantly, as if the air had been sucked from the courtyard. Isolde heard the heavy, rhythmic thud of massive paws approaching. The handlers had dropped the chains in sheer terror. Slowly, terrified of what she would see, Isolde looked up. Boreas, the fearsome ashen guardian, stood towering over her. Up close, he was the size of a carriage, a mountain of muscle and lethal teeth. The entire courtyard was locked in frozen horror. Up on the balcony, King Leander gripped the stone railing, his eyes wide, his body tense and ready to leap to kill his own beast to save the human. But Boreas did not bare his teeth. The giant wolf lowered his massive head, sniffing the scent of crushed pine, lye, and a faint hint of dried chamomile on her hands. A low, rumbling purr vibrated in the beast's chest. Then, in front of the king, the elders, and the cruel, mocking nobles, the ashen guardian, did the unthinkable. He bent his front legs. He lowered his massive chest to the wet cobblestones. He dropped his chin into the mud right beside Isolde's trembling hands, tucked his tail, and bared the underside of his throat to her. It was the ultimate sign of submission. The sacred beast was bowing. A pin drop could have been heard in the fortress. Lady Vivian stared, her jaw unhinged in absolute shock. High above, King Leander's golden eyes locked onto the frail human girl sitting in the mud. His ancestral beast had made its choice. The sacred magic of the pack had recognized its queen. The silence in the grand courtyard was absolute, a suffocating vacuum that seemed to stretch into eternity. The howling wind of the northern fjords died down, leaving only the sound of crackling torches and the ragged, terrified breathing of the human girl trapped in the mud. Boreas, the ancestral nightmare, remained completely still, his massive chin resting gently beside Isolde's scraped knees. His golden eyes, normally burning with feral malice, were half closed in total submission. Up on the royal balcony, the heavy stone railing splintered. King Leander had gripped the carved obsidian with such ferocious intensity that the ancient rock simply gave way beneath his massive hands. He did not use the stone stairs to descend. With a surge of raw, predatory power, the Alpha King vaulted over the balcony, plummeting 20 feet to the courtyard below. He landed with a heavy, earth-shattering thud, the impact cracking the cobblestones. The sheer force of his alpha aura exploded outward, a suffocating wave of dominance that forced the surrounding noble wolves to their knees. Every eye watched in paralyzed fascination as the king rose. Standing at 6'5", clad in black fur and boiled leather, Leander was a walking god of war. His jaw was clenched, the jagged scar across his face stark white against his flushed skin. He stalked toward the center of the courtyard, his boots crunching over the frozen mud. "Your Majesty, wait!" shouted Elder Harrison, a grizzled, silver-haired wolf who served as the king's chief advisor. Harrison scrambled down the stairs, his robes flapping wildly. "The beast is confused. The girl is covered in filth. It is a mistake of scent." Leander ignored him. He stopped where 3 paces from Isolde. Up close, the king was even more terrifying. His eyes, the same molten gold as the Ashen Guardian's, burned into her. Isolde trembled violently, instinctively trying to pull away, but the giant wolf at her side let out a low, warning rumble directed at anyone who dared move, even the king. "Boreas," Leander commanded, his voice a gravelly baritone that sent a shiver down Isolde's spine. "Stand!" The giant beast blinked, slowly lifting his massive head. He rose to his full, terrifying height, but refused to step away from the human girl. Instead, Boreas deliberately stepped over Isolde, positioning his massive, muscular body as a living shield between the human servant and the Alpha King. Gasps echoed through the courtyard. Lord Nathaniel, a prominent noble of the Southern Reach, drew his sword. "The human has bewitched the Guardian. It is dark magic. Kill the dirt-born witch." "Sheath your steel, Nathaniel," Leander snarled without looking away from Isolde, "or I will feed your heart to the crows." The sword was instantly sheathed. No one defied the Alpha King. Leander slowly dropped to one knee, uncaring that the freezing mud stained his royal trousers. He reached out a massive calloused hand. Isolde flinched, slamming her eyes shut, expecting a killing blow. Instead, she felt the startling heat of his rough fingertips, gently wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "Look at me," Leander ordered softly. Isolde opened her eyes. She found herself staring directly into the soul of the most dangerous man in the kingdom. There was no disgust in his gaze. Instead, there was a profound, possessive hunger, mixed with utter awe. "What is your name, little bird?" he asked, his voice dropping to a register meant only for her. Isolde, your grace," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Isolde," he repeated, tasting the syllables as if they were fine wine. He stood, suddenly scooping her into his arms. Isolde gasped, instinctively grabbing onto his broad shoulders as she was lifted effortlessly from the ground. Boreas let out a satisfied huff and immediately flanked the king's right side. "The rite of the silver moon is concluded. Leander's voice boomed across the courtyard, addressing the stunned nobility. The Ashen Guardian has chosen. The ancestral magic has spoken. Isolde is my destined mate. Complete chaos erupted. "This is an outrage!" screamed Lady Vivian, stepping forward with her ruined crimson dress clinging to her muddy legs. "She is a human, a frail, dirt-born scullery maid. She cannot give you strong pups. She cannot lead armies. You would taint the royal bloodline with a creature that lives only a fraction of our years." "I said the rite is concluded," Leander growled, a terrifying, guttural sound that vibrated through the chests of every wolf present. His eyes flashed with pure alpha power. "If anyone questions the sacred laws of House Vane, step forward and challenge me for the crown right now." No one moved. Vivian's fists clenched, her face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. But she lowered her gaze. Elder Harrison looked as though he might be sick, exchanging a dark, conspiratorial glance with Lord Nathaniel. "Take her to the royal chambers," Leander commanded the trembling head maid, Victoria, who had just rushed into the courtyard. "Bathe her. Dress her in the finest silks. Treat her as your queen, or answer to me." As Leander carried her through the sprawling stone corridors of the keep, Isolde's mind was reeling. She, a lowly servant who had scrubbed these very floors hours ago, was now being held against the chest of the Alpha King. The scent of him, pine needles, wood smoke, and raw rain, was intoxicating. "Why are you doing this?" Isolde whispered fearfully, looking up at his scarred profile. "They will hate you for it." Leander looked down at her, his expression softening just a fraction. "They already hate me, Isolde. They follow me out of fear. But my beast—" He glanced back at Boreas, who was padding silently behind them. "My beast does not bow out of fear. He bowed out of reverence, and I intend to find out exactly why." The next 3 days were a whirlwind of velvet, silk, and whispered rumors. Isolde was sequestered in the sprawling opulence of the king's chambers. Maidservants who used to sneer at her now bowed deeply, their eyes wide with fear. Victoria, the head maid, scrubbed the soot from Isolde's skin, revealing porcelain flesh and cascading raven hair that shone like spun glass in the firelight. When adorned in the traditional silver-threaded gowns of the royal house, Isolde did not look like a servant. She looked ethereal. During the quiet evenings, Leander would visit her. The terrifying Alpha King shed his armor and his ruthlessness at her door. They sat by the roaring hearth, and slowly, hesitantly, Isolde shared her story. She told him about her father, the apothecary, and the night she saved Boreas from the silver trap. Leander listened in stunned silence. "You faced a feral werewolf, rabid with pain, and sang it to sleep?" he asked, shaking his head in disbelief. "You are not fragile, Isolde. You have the heart of a lioness, wrapped in the body of a dove." But outside the safety of the royal chambers, a deadly storm was brewing. Lady Vivian, stripped of her pride and humiliated before the entire kingdom, had not been idle. She had gathered the most fundamentalist nobles in the keep, including Elder Harrison and Lord Nathaniel. To them, the coronation of a human queen was an apocalyptic insult. They believed the pack would become a laughingstock to the rival kingdoms. "We strike tonight," Vivian whispered fiercely in the dimly lit cellars beneath the armory. "The coronation is at midnight beneath the blood moon. If the human is crowned, her scent will permanently bind to the king's soul. We must sever the bond before it is sealed." "It is treason, Vivian," Elder Harrison warned, though his hands rested eagerly on his silver dagger. "If Leander catches us, He will slaughter our entire bloodlines." "He will be distracted," Lord Nathaniel replied with a cruel smile. "I have bribed the guards at the northern gate. We will let a pack of wild shadow stalkers into the lower courtyard. While the king and his warriors are dealing with the beasts, we take the human." As the midnight hour approached, the castle was bathed in the crimson light of the blood moon. Isolde stood before the massive vanity mirror, a heavy crown of interwoven silver branches resting upon her dark hair. She looked beautiful, but her heart hammered with an unshakable dread. Suddenly, the warning bells of the fortress began to ring wildly. Shouts erupted from the courtyard below, followed by the terrifying screeches of shadow stalkers, vicious, mindless predators from the frozen wastelands. Leander burst into the chambers, his sword already drawn, his eyes glowing fiercely. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "Lock the heavy oak doors. Boreas will stay with you. Do not open the door for anyone but me." He kissed her forehead, a brief, burning touch, and sprinted down the corridor. Isolde rushed to the door, slamming the heavy iron bolts into place. Boreas let out a low growl, pacing anxiously before the doorway. Minutes dragged by like hours. The sound of battle outside was deafening. Then she heard it, the scrape of metal against stone. Not from the door, but from the hidden servants' passageway behind the tapestries, a secret door only the nobility and the oldest servants knew existed. The tapestry was torn aside, and Lady Vivian stepped into the room, flanked by Lord Nathaniel and 2 armed guards. Vivian held a jagged blade coated in dark, purple poison, wolfsbane mixed with nightshade, lethal to both humans and wolves. "Did you really think a rat could wear a crown?" Vivian hissed, stepping forward. Boreas roared, leaping at the intruders. He collided with the 2 guards, tearing them apart in seconds. But Lord Nathaniel was ready. He threw a heavy, silver-weighted net over the great beast. The silver burned into Boreas's flesh, pinning the sacred wolf to the ground as he thrashed and howled in agony. Vivian lunged at Isolde. Isolde didn't freeze. The years of dodging cruel blows in the scullery kicked in. She threw herself to the side, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. As Vivian slashed wildly, tearing a gash across Isolde's arm, Isolde swung the iron rod with all her might. It cracked against Vivian's wrist, sending the poisoned dagger clattering across the stone floor. Furious, Vivian shifted partially, her nails extending into deadly claws. She backhanded Isolde, sending the fragile human crashing into the vanity mirror. Glass shattered everywhere. "Hold her down," Vivian commanded Nathaniel. The Lord grabbed Isolde by the hair, forcing her to her knees. Vivian picked up the poisoned dagger, a triumphant, sadistic smile stretching across her face. "Goodbye, little bird." Before the blade could fall, the heavy oak doors exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew like shrapnel as King Leander tore into the room. He was covered in black blood from the shadow stalkers, his chest heaving, his face a mask of absolute, unbridled fury. He had realized the attack was a diversion the moment he saw the poorly cut locks on the northern gate. "Leander!" Vivian gasped, dropping the knife. The Alpha King didn't speak. He moved with a speed that defied comprehension. In one fluid motion, he grabbed Lord Nathaniel by the throat and lifted him off the ground. With a sickening crunch, he snapped the traitor's neck and tossed his lifeless body aside. Vivian scrambled backward, screaming for mercy. But Leander was a predator who had just found his mate in danger. He shifted into his terrifying, bipedal wolf form, his roar shaking the very foundations of the castle. He grabbed Vivian by her crimson dress and hurled her through the shattered vanity, leaving her bleeding and terrified on the floor. Leander immediately turned to Isolde. He shifted back to his human form, falling to his knees beside her. He frantically checked her wounds, his hands trembling as he saw the blood on her arm. "I'm all right," Isolde whispered, reaching up to touch his scarred face. "I'm okay. Check Boreas." Leander turned and ripped the burning silver net off his ancestral beast. Boreas whined, licking Isolde's hand as she reached out to comfort him. The king stood, his eyes locking onto Vivian, who was crawling toward the door. "Guards!" Leander bellowed. 10 royal guards flooded into the ruined chamber. "Take Lady Vivian to the dungeons. Strip her of her titles, her lands, and her name. Tomorrow, she faces the executioner's block for high treason." As Vivian was dragged away, screaming and sobbing, Elder Harrison was brought in chains, having been caught fleeing the castle. The rebellion was crushed before it had even fully begun. The chaos settled, leaving the chamber quiet save for the crackling of the fire. Leander knelt before Isolde once more. He didn't care about the blood or the shattered glass. He took her small, scarred hands in his massive ones and pressed them to his forehead. "You fought them," Leander murmured, awe evident in his voice. "A human, fighting 2 armed alphas." "I told you," Isolde smiled weakly, leaning her forehead against his. "I am not just a fragile little bird." Leander chuckled, a deep, rich sound that seemed to heal the darkness in the room. "No, you are my queen." The next night, the courtyard was rebuilt, and the entire kingdom was gathered. There were no whispers of dissent, no mocking laughter. When Isolde stepped out onto the royal balcony, wearing a gown of midnight blue and the silver crown of House Vane, the wolves did not howl in derision. King Leander stood beside her, his hand resting proudly on the small of her back. Below them, Boreas let out a thunderous, approving roar. Taking the beast's lead, the thousands of werewolves in the courtyard dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in deep, unwavering reverence. The dirt-born servant had not just survived the monster's den, she had conquered it entirely. What a journey for Isolde, going from the mocked dirt-born servant to the fiercely defended queen of House Vane. Her bravery against the vicious Lady Vivian proves that true strength doesn't always require fangs and claws. If you loved this medieval werewolf drama and want more thrilling stories of hidden royalty, unexpected mates, and epic revenge,